there's an escape route just to the right or just to the left, or a little modification, and the person says, no, I'm just going to keep doing this thing, smashing my face against the window until I die.
Alarm clock in the morning? Are you just like, oh my gosh, snooze, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I can't take it? And then even then when you have to get up, are you like dragging yourself out of bed? It's not supposed to be like that. That is a sign that something's not right. And the one thing to be very aware of it is diagnosis. When you actually look at what that word is, first of all, it has die in it. And the next word that's hidden in there is gnosis. So this inner knowing.
Because that's how it happens.
Wisdom
that change from one reality tunnel to another is rapid.
We have ancient stories that are stored in our salt, and those stories are constantly reaffirmed.
I don't care what it is. I trust Heidi and Thaddeus, but I trust Heidi and Thaddeus.
Your modern work life is designed to keep you busy. Have you eating foods that make you feel tired, lethargic, and give you just enough energy to feed it to the monster corporation? We're kept moderately sheltered and addictively entertained, and of course passively obedient enough to keep doing it. Do you long for something more but don't know where to start? These corporate escape artists have broken free from the ordinary. They walk unfrequented paths. They break pattern, and they've broken free. Fix your finances, hack your health, and unlearn the lies keeping you stuck in the matrix. Welcome to the Corporate Escape Artists Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Corporate Escape Artists Podcast. I am your co-host, Heidi Syme, and this is episode number 2. This is going to be my solo cast, and these are stories of escape, corporate escape, and corporate evasion, and I am a proud evader of corporate, so I'm here today to talk a little bit more about how I have throughout my literally entire life evaded the corporate world, and what did I do? How did I do it? And why? I think why is a really important aspect of it. And maybe what are some of the aspects of the corporate world that never resonated with me? And actually how the universe never really opened those doors for me. So it's kind of an interesting, as I was making some bullet points for the podcast, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It never really fell into anything that I was actively doing. So it's kind of an interesting, looking at the timeline of one's past, right? And I would actually encourage you all to do that too, and kind of look at your own past and see like how far you've come. So that's actually one of the cool things. So I am also a frequency health and wellness coach, and I teach people really how to bring positivity into their world and raise their frequency. So you're going to hear aspects of that in my personality throughout this entire podcast. So hopefully that will be inspiring to you. And so let's get into it. And again, I'm Heidi, and I am a proud corporate evader. All right. So some of the corporate aspects that I literally just cannot handle, because I realize too, I'm also a contrarian, and contrarians live almost opposite of society. And there are plenty of contrarians that I know, but some of the things that I've studied in the past are the contrarians of Native American or indigenous tribes too. And I think it's the Lakota tribe. They have what's called a Heyokia, Heyokya, Heyokia. And that person actually does live contrary to society. And I don't know why I came into this world to sign up for a contrarian role, but that is how I operate. So when I see something in society or what the mass of society is doing, I always have tended to do the opposite. So I guess, when I look at and I think about the corporate world, I kind of shudder a little bit. And you know what, you guys, everybody's different. So if that is perfectly suited for you, then that's exactly where you're supposed to be, and that's perfect, right? But for me, I just knew that that is not where my heart and my soul will flourish. So, the very first and foremost thing that happened to me, like right out of college, is I got a job, and it wasn't with a local art gallery, and it was with this couple. They're from Nova Scotia, and they started an art gallery, and they're just like really entrepreneurial, and they were just killing it. They were doing such a cool job and bringing this beautiful space into our small town in Wisconsin. And I was really inspired by them. And I actually got a job out of school in working in a darkroom. Those of you who don't know what a darkroom is, because of the digital photography now, it's where we used to use chemicals in an actual darkroom with light to, like, I don't know how to explain it. How do you even explain a darkroom to somebody who has no concept of that? It's kind of interesting. I'd use a projector using light to make a print in chemicals. And I spent a lot of time doing that. So I was actually a professional darkroom developer is what I was. So I was working for this woman in Minneapolis, and she was super entrepreneurial as well. And she catered to the weddings of like the Minneapolis elite. And she was a really high-end photographer. She used some really neat cameras, medium format. And I got to play around and experiment a lot in her darkroom and use her studio whenever I wanted. So I really started I just like started falling into like being my own boss and watching these actually two women that were really strong in my life, like have their own businesses and do really well. Like they did really well, especially the photographer. And I was like, oh, I can do this. So I actually started my own, wedding photography, and I started shooting families. And wait, that didn't sound good. I started photographing families and kids, and I was doing really well. And I was making really good money just out of college. And then something happened, and the universe, like, literally stopped me in my tracks. And I had just gotten done with a family photo shoot with some people, which I didn't even know them. And I was borrowing somebody's truck. I can't remember. For some reason, I was borrowing somebody's truck, and I parked it, and I went in to get something from one of our local stores. And when I came back, I had all my equipment in the car, and I'm used to like doot doot, like hitting the lock on my key fob. And I didn't have that option with this truck. So I locked it on my side, but I didn't even really think about the other side of the truck. I just kind of assumed that it would be locked. So I went in literally for 10, maybe 15 minutes, came back out. All my equipment was gone. And I just sat there. I started crying. I was like, oh my God. And the biggest thing for me was that I had to call the people who I had just had a photo shoot with, and I had to tell them that it was gone. And I was like, I was more devastated about that part because it was so embarrassing. And they were so nice and they were so accommodating. And I gave them their money back, and like it was all fine. But it was really interesting, like, going back and reflecting on that. And it's like, oh, I wasn't supposed to go down that path, right? And there wasn't something there for me. So like I did some recouping and reevaluating of what my next move was. So I think it's really interesting too how the universe like puts things in front of you or keeps them from you. But I'm just going to back up a tiny bit. The thing that happened before that was I had my children. And so I got married, and I had one child from a previous marriage, and he was like 6 years older than I had three more. So I have four children altogether, and I had three more, and they're all like born 2002, 2004, 2006, and like boom, 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 right back to back. And so one of the things that I think has kept me out of the corporate world the most are those children, because you guys, I actually spent every moment that I could with my children. I I was a server in the evenings when I was a very young mom, just to make, some extra money and get out of the house once in a while. But I spent 7 years home with them, and from the time they were born, especially the younger three, I spent the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm trying to think, 3, 4, 5 years with them, home with them, and never put them in daycare, never had anyone else take care of them unless it was like a grandparent or very, very trusted nanny. And I was absolutely committed to raising my family. And I took that job. That is actually the job that I have taken the most serious in my life. And even after all those kids, started going to elementary school and they weren't home during the day, I would still be educating them and talking to them and teaching them and talking to them about emotional intelligence. And I really treated them like they were kind of adults in my house, and I ended up getting divorced. And every moment that I got to spend with my kids, I was absolutely guiding them, teaching them, and we would go outdoors and do as much as we could with lifetime sports. So I didn't really get caught up in I guess, in my opinion, that those sports sometimes can hold families hostage. And I know I'm using harsh language around that because it's really good for team building. And don't get me wrong, I see all that. But when kids get involved in, sports and different things, it takes a lot of time away from family and from your siblings. And so what I did is like, I really taught my kids like outdoor adventure sports. So we would cross country ski, and my kids have been cross country skiing since my daughter was 5. And like she had to keep up with us, and she got really good. She was actually somewhat better than all of us at a certain time in her life, which was really cute. But I taught them kayaking. I taught them, let's see, camping, winter camping, just like anything that we could do outdoors, swimming, going to the beach. I mean, sun tanning, right? Like all the things that we do in nature, hiking, of course, and walking. So, as a family, we all did that. And we also participated in what was called Destination Imagination, which is a competitive theater program. And all of us did that. All of the 3 younger children and myself, I was a coach for a really long time. So those are the things that we did as a family, as a really tight-knit family. And I kept my kids really, really close. So that really was why I was like, I literally am not going to get a corporate job because I don't want to miss time with my kids. And I think like that is the number one reason. And, like trying to raise a family, being a single mom, it was no easy task, right? And also at the same time, trying to create an income and a business. There's an author, her name is Martha Beck. She taught me this a while back, and it's called The Social Self and the Essential Self. And she has a book. It's called Steering by Starlight. Another one is Finding Your Own North Star. I've read all her books, and I know her work inside and out. And she talks about being able to, like show up as your essential self. And I felt that, like the corporate world, really, you have to show up as your social self to be accepted and to really be a part of the team, right? So I was like, oh, that is really just not for me. And again, if that's for you and that's, like that's all great, but it wasn't my path. So I just knew that the universe was really not opening any of those doors for me. And so I'm going to go back to, I guess, my timeline. And I decided that I had a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and I was like, they didn't teach me anything about business, which is kind of a shame because, like, why would I spend 5 years of my life learning about all this art history and all this art and all this stuff and I actually did more art. I made art every day for hours and hours. And I didn't get any business. Like, what? Okay, then what? Then you graduate, and then what do you do? And it's like that's every parent's nightmare, right? Like you send your kid to school for 4 to 5 years of college, and then they're like, okay, now what? Well, why wouldn't they have taught business classes to an artist? Like it makes zero sense. So I really spent 5 years developing my right brain. And I'm definitely, labeling myself as a creative and an artist. And the left brain stuff really is not, first of all, intuitive to me, but it takes a lot. So I guess if I were to go back and do things differently, I would definitely have incorporated some business classes into my undergrad, but I decided to go back to school and get my Master of Fine Arts degree. And this was after I got divorced and I started taking interior design classes. And the interior design professor that I was working with, this was like really at the height of my divorce, and I was just kind of an emotional, wreck, and it was really hard. And she was like, "Why are you getting another bachelor's degree with interior design?" And I was like, "I don't know." I'm like, I had no guidance, right? Like, I don't know. I didn't know anything. And I was like, "I don't know." And she's like, "Well, it doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you go get your Master of Fine Arts degree?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that was a thing." So the universe guided me to a very unique school in Northeast Minneapolis called Vesper College. And at Vesper College, I did go on in 2010 to get my Master of Fine Arts degree in ecological architecture, which is kind of a crazy thing. It was a private school. It wasn't accredited. So, but I learned some really cool stuff. I was there for 7 years after that. I went on to be the studio welding instructor. I taught graduate level studio art, and I was also working diligently. We were turning the school into a 501c3. At the same time, I was asked to be on the school board of a new school called Northeast Arts and Science Polytechnic, which never started, but it was a really cool experience. So I was like really plummeted into this, graduate level education, and actually just, with the Arts and Sciences Polytechnic, I learned a ton of stuff about education and how we just do it so wrong. And as a contrarian, I was like, oh yeah, this is for me. So we weren't about like reforming any school. We were about starting new and starting from the ground zero and starting something completely different. So, and there are other schools at polytechnic schools. This was the whole school. The basis was that it was hands-on. Everything was hands-on. And I'm a kinesthetic learner. I'm very much an audible learner too, as well as visual, but those other two things, much more. And so I was really excited about that. And then after 7 years, I all of a sudden, I just decided that I couldn't do that anymore. I left a relationship, and it was all just a big dramatic, I don't know, shit show is the only word I can use in that situation. And so I left. I left the relationship. I left the school. I left everything I had been working for 7 years, and I came back to my hometown, took a job with a local like interior design flooring company, and it was a lot of fun. So, like here I am evading. These are all everybody that I had worked with, from the very beginning, were all entrepreneurs, and really interesting entrepreneurs, I would add. So I'm gathering all this information, I'm learning all this stuff and failing, learning, succeeding, failing, right? And through that, I ended up at a interior design center, and I was, going to work every day. And it was really kind of like one of my first jobs that I had to be like dress up and go. It was, I guess, a little more corporate than I maybe thought, but it was still owned by a local family. And things got weird after about 6 months at that job. And I was like, I can do this on my own. So I just started doing interior design on my own. And I'm literally, I just feel like I'm kind of the worst employee. I'm unemployable because I don't like authority, and I really didn't want to keep working for somebody. There's other reasons. We're not going to get into that here. But it just didn't work out. So I decided to work on my own, and I started my own interior design company, and I also started substitute teaching. So here I am back into, design and then teaching. And I'm like, oh, I love those two things. I love to teach. Like it's one of my absolute favorite things. So substitute teaching feels a little bit more like, yeah, maybe that could be, corporate, a corporate, I don't know, environment. And there were definitely aspects of it that I was just like, oh, I hate this because I don't like rules. And that's one of the things that I wrote down is like, why isn't corporate for me is like, there's just too many rules, and I'm not, again, not able to be my essential self. Well, I kind of went into substitute teaching as a rogue teacher. I was learning from my new boyfriend, who's my husband now, Thaddeus Owen. my co-host for the podcast, and I was learning all these super cool things. So some of the things that I had been doing with my own kids is like when I learned something, especially when I was reading Martha Beck early on, I would teach it to my kids. So that's one thing that I would encourage you to do as well, is to anything that you're learning and that your kids are young, like start teaching it to them. You'd be surprised at what levels they can interpret. And I mean, there's a level of understanding with kids, and you can start planting seeds with them really, really early. We were listening to Wayne Dyer early as my kids were like, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and planting those seeds with them and really programming their subconscious mind. So if you listen to our podcast, I think it's in one of the next few podcasts, it'll be Jason Christoff. He talks about mind control. And one of the things I did with my kids early on, because I spent so much time with them, I was actually programming them. And, my kids turned out really nice. I have some really nice, kind humans, and they're ironically all entrepreneurs as well, or they work for entrepreneurs. It's pretty cool. So as a substitute teacher, I'm just going to circle back to that. I was teaching some of the things that my now husband, Thaddeus, was teaching me about cell phone safety and about nutrition and just like so many things about health and wellness. It was just like this whole new world that started opening up to me, and intermittent fasting. And I wasn't teaching that to kids. No, kids should not fast. I was teaching the kids about the cell phones, and I'm going to tell you this one quick story. So I was at local high school, and I was in a room, and the entire room, you guys, was a concrete cell block room. There was not one window. This teacher was going to sit all year in a room all day long because I was the sub, right? So this teacher that was normally there is going to sit there all year long in a room made of concrete and no windows. I was like, how is this different than prison? Like, I feel like I don't know. Like, I'm so confused by that. So the fluorescent lights are buzzing above our heads. And I look up and there's a Wi-Fi router in the middle. And I'm like, oh my Lord, this is literally the worst toxic soup of crap, junk light, and EMF that you could possibly put yourself in. I was like, these poor kids, like, what is happening right now? And I, was kind of looking around. I think they were 10th graders. And I was like, hey, do you guys all have a cell phone in your pocket? Every single one of them pulled out a cell phone from their pocket that was on. So I'm literally sitting in a EMF soup. Like, it was so gross. And I don't know if you guys like, there's a lot of stuff you can learn about EMF, and what we're told is basically an out and out lie. And there's 5,000 peer reviewed studies. And my husband teaches all about that. And you can look at our other company called Primalhacker, and we teach all about EMFs. So if you want to look more into that, you absolutely can. I'm not going to go into that here. So the EMF soup, and I'm like, oh my God, these kids need sunlight. These kids, like, my instinct was like, take them outside. So I took them outside, and I was there. I think that teacher was out for a week. So I was there, like every day for a week. And every day I took them outside, and I was like, guys, like, let's go out and run around. Let's leave the phones behind, and let's just go outside and get some sunshine. I think it was like April or something. It was springtime. And the kids were so excited. And then I was teaching them about cell phone stuff, and I'd bring in like a little meter and show them, the science experiments. I would do a little bit of what the lesson was supposed to, but not a ton. Well, by the end of the week, I got a call, and they said, you are no longer able to come back to the high school. And I was like, what? And they're like, you took the kids outside. And I was like, oh my God, I guess you can't take the kids outside to teach them anything. It was really, really disheartening. And so I was like, oh, you know what? Like, again, here's another sign that's like, I guess this isn't for me. And although I'd have a lot of fun with the kids, I really love the middle school kids. and just interacting with them it's pretty funny. Sometimes a little dramatic, but I did have one kid like throw a basketball at my head, and had I not ducked, it would have smashed me in the face. That was probably like the most dramatic, but other than that, they're really sweet and they're really fun. But I had, one of the kids come up to me in that science class, and before I left, and he said, I tell you what, he goes, I learned more from you in one day than I have from this teacher all year. And I was like, what? He was like, he's like, I don't even know what this class is, what I'm doing in this class. And I'm like, well, that's a whole nother discussion as well with the education system. But I kind of took that to heart, and I was like, oh my God, like this is not okay. So I was still teaching in the middle school. 2020 happened, March of 2020. And it's actually 4 years ago from when I'm recording this podcast. And we all went home. I didn't have to go back and substitute teach. All the schools were closed, and I pulled my kids obviously out of school, and I never sent them back. I was like, that's it. I cannot sign up to have them go back into that institution where they're going to be programmed. They're going to be around other kids who maybe probably don't have the same ideals and values as we do. And it was just time. So I'm in the last year of homeschooling, which I actually call unschooling. I've recently changed that this year with my daughter because my two other sons are already out of school. And I turned it into from unschool to fun school. And I was like, you know what? If I was a teenager, or when I was a teenager, what would I have wanted to do with my time? Right. And I looked up some of the laws and rules and all the things with the state of Wisconsin. And it's really interesting. That's again another podcast, but it's interesting that how many hours they keep kids in school is not what the law says. So I'll just leave it at that. But I was like, wouldn't you want it to be fun? And that was really what we were trying to do with the Polytechnic school, is like have kids get interested again, excited and inspired, and creating entrepreneurs. And there are definitely people that are doing that within the institutions, but also, how many more could we be creating, right? And we were really working towards bringing culinary in and hydroponics, and like one of the other things that my husband and I taught the kids is foraging and how to be able to source some food if you're just out and about in the forest, and what to look for, just some other skills that are really, really some missed up our education system. And I'm not really going to tiptoe around that anymore. It's an absolute shit show. And we all know that's this like white elephant in the room. And it's like, the kids aren't learning anything. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be an engineer, yeah, that's great, right? Like that's what you need to get to that point. But kids aren't learning anything. They're segregated by age. There's so many things that we're not doing right. So I don't think that's any like breaking news to anybody, especially if you're listening to this podcast. What happened after that? I found myself, in a new relationship, and Thaddeus and I ended up getting married in 2020, and everything just kind of changed. And I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to be a life coach. Like ever since that day back in, 2010, I read my first Martha Beck self-help life coach book. It changed my life. And that moment in time, I was like, I want to be a life coach. And, I signed up for some coaching, and I took a leadership program, and I literally, you guys, like I love life coaching so much, and I've been wanting to do it for 15 years. Like it's kind of crazy how long I've been wanting to do it. So 3 years ago, I stepped into that role, and that's what has led me into, creating this podcast with Thaddeus. And now we're in the education business. I actually have changed my title I call myself a frequency coach, but I'm really a cycle breaker. And, I look around at some of the things that I've created in my life. And again, it's all those children, all the new life that I brought to this planet, and they're really good humans. And I feel really proud of that. So I know a lot of times in this like crazy ultra feminist culture, I don't even know what this culture is. It's an experiment, actually. We don't put a lot of value in parenting. And I know there are parents out there that that, really try and really do some good work, we don't really value like how big of a role the mother plays in raising her young, and we certainly don't get paid for it, right? I know my universal payment is on its way. So one other aspect that I wanted to look at, just with my own story, shed some light on it, is recently I was in this really cool spiritual container. The woman, who is very much a spiritual entrepreneur, had asked everybody to close their eyes and sit back and think about their parents, their grandparents on both sides, and their grandparents. So, like all the ancestors, right? And the generations that came before you. And she said, make a list of all of them that were corporate or that were entrepreneurs. I started to write down a list, and I was absolutely amazed that when you write things down, it really kind of becomes evident that I came from a crazy family of entrepreneurs. I don't have anybody in my ancestry that wasn't an entrepreneur, which was crazy, right? I was like, what? I never even had thought of it before. And then she said, write down too, like, what did they do and what were they doing and blah, blah. So I kind of went back to that list and I was looking at it, and I have a grandmother on my maternal side, and she was like the best homesteader. Like, we're really into making our own ferments and sourdough bread and eating living foods and that kind of thing. And I wish my grandmother was still alive because I wanted to learn. She had her own chickens. Like, they ate a ton of venison from their land. They lived in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, which is a really interesting place. She had jars and jars of pickles and pickled fish and all these cool things in her basement. And I wish I would, and amazing gardens, like incredible gardens. Those are some of my favorite memories, is just like spending time with her in the garden. And she died, I think she was like 70 some years old, and she had dementia really bad. So I didn't really get to spend much time with her toward the end of her life and ask her all these things. So if I were to go back, I would definitely be asking her a bunch of questions. And she also had her own nightclub and ballroom, and they ran a bar in a very small town in central Wisconsin. She was very much like her whole life. It's really cool to like look back at that. And then she had a brother who was a old, like, I'm going to call him an old school or the OG biohacker. My Uncle Joe was like this crazy holistic dentist that he could save anybody's tooth. Like, he was really cool. He'd go around the country and give lectures. I'm pretty sure he studied with Weston A. Price Foundation, and he definitely knew about it. And he was just like an inventor, and he was an investor, and he had a buffalo farm, and he was just a crazy dude. We were at his house for Easter one year. Stands out in my mind above all other memories. And he was hanging upside down on an inversion table with magnets all over his body as we're eating Easter dinner. So funny. Then I'm looking at, my own parents. My parents are definitely, my mom was like a homesteader. I shouldn't call her homesteader. She's more of like a homemaker, and I mean that in a very respectful way, with many accolades, because it's not the easy, it's literally probably the toughest job there is, that you don't get any accolades or payment for. And I think like she really instilled in me some of these, I would say, more traditional values of like, nobody's going to take care of your children better than you, right? And what it is that you're going to teach them will be the lasting like programming for those children. So, and then my father is an entrepreneur from the time I was born. He had his own business, very successful throughout most of his life. Trying to think back of like any other ancestors that kind of stand out to me. We come from a family of Scandinavian farmers, which were obviously entrepreneurs. And beyond that, I think it's kind of just goes back to more farming families in generations beyond that. So I would encourage you all to make a list of your family members and then what you were taught, what you were surrounded by in your own family. I do have two people in our family that work in corporate now, right? And it's really interesting. In closing, I just want to leave you all with a thought of how you perceive the corporate world and if that is aligning to your soul. For me, it was a soul sucking aspect. I have been a corporate evader my whole life. So in this podcast, our hope is that we bring to light highlights and some of the darkness of what it is to work in corporate and how to escape that if that is your calling. You can still work in corporate. And one of the things Thaddeus and I talk about and we'll be addressing throughout the whole podcast and our course is, your mindset, your attitude. Your attitude is everything. So that's why we say you can still escape corporate without quitting your job, because in your own mind, you can start thinking like an entrepreneur. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and you guys all have an amazing day. If you want to be a corporate escape artist, head on over to howtoescapecorporate.com and sign up for the How to Escape Corporate Without Leaving Your Job course. Learn the exact methods to go from employee to entrepreneur. Turn your corporate existence into a corporate wonderland. It's time to take action. howtoescapecorporate.com. Remember, members get the full-length podcast over at howtoescapecorporate.substack.com. Become a member for $8 a month for the full podcast and members-only articles and videos.